So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Hi, everyone. I'm not going to take 10 minutes to do this because I want to get right into some conversation. But just a quick view of what I do here. I'm core faculty in the Department of East-West Psychology here. And I'm also happy to say that I'm ERIE's faculty liaison. That's great, so I'm happy to do that. I'm still waiting for all the free Entheogens they promised me. So we'll see how that shakes down.
For the rest of us.
Yeah, distribute a few of them too. Have a few public events. So can you all hear me okay? Am I speaking into this?
Yes.
All right, good. So a couple of things about what I'm interested in, both academically and on a deeply personal level. Larry mentioned a few of them. I love depth psychology. It's what my PhD was in with an ecological emphasis. So the psychology that looks at all those interesting things like myth and archetype, things like that. I love eco-psychology, so it's transdisciplinary. It looks across different ways to imagine and study and think about and rethink about our connection to the natural world, and also our connection to the built environment too. And I love alchemy as well, and I'm hoping we can have some conversation about that. So many alchemical themes coming up tonight. Great stuff. So what I thought I would do is actually start with a question and use that as sort of a jumping off point to just sort of see where this goes. So while you were talking tonight, I heard the word Entheonet, and I heard that before I came from the flyer, and then Larry had mentioned it to me as well. And I love that image. It started to resonate for me as soon as I heard it. So I was wondering if you could just unpack it a little bit and say what it is and what it looks like. I know you covered it a little bit when you were talking, but I'm sort of at times I'm a visual learner. So how do you see it unfolding across the world? Those kinds of questions.
I think it would really kind of have to start with opening up shared communities related to entheogens. You know, the San Francisco Psychedelic Society, I know, is a group that whose purpose is to kind of share their experiences and their visions. So I think starting kind of at this ground level where you can get enough people together first, and then start kind of sharing the idea of this tool. And the tool basically is just using the internet, and internet is kind of a shared cognitive tool. So it's kind of like a peripheral, I guess you could say. So when you have an entheogenic experience, you kind of have to treat it like an education. And so you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, what do these things mean? And so for me, I just kind of stumbled on Google Images, because I had all these images, and I'm like, what does this mean? What is this? And so there'd be a lot of kind of things to really have to fine-tune to come up with a solid idea of what the Entheonet is. But the basic concept is using the idea is shared cognition, I think it's called. That's something I learned in when I was working on my information technology degree, this idea of using computers and using other peripheral devices to distribute cognition and to kind of accelerate the learning process. So that's kind of the basic, the basic structure of it. And I think actually the groups would be great for developing this idea of the Entheonet, because I think then we could share some creative ways in searching for the images, because it's kind of hard to how do you put in words what you saw, because the image itself is kind of beyond words. And so getting creative with using Boolean operators, I guess. So that's kind of the basic structure of it. But I think I think I touched on it a little bit, but I think this is actually evolving. I'm not total tech guy, but I kind of like to keep up on technology, and there's some really interesting things happening with the internet. This semantic web, or Web 3.0, is really fascinating because it adds another layer of intelligence. So I think that we're going to have better, more efficient tools to aid the psychonautic explorer. Yeah.
When I was a graduate student, I was having a conversation with an advisor of mine, psychologist Mary Watkins, and I had done a year in the clinical program, not here, at another school, and I was dissatisfied with it for a number of different reasons. And so I was talking to Mary, and I asked her, so what do you do in this depth psychology program? And at first I thought she said death psychology. Hillman would love that. And she said, well, we like to think of ourselves as engaged in a cultural therapeutics. And I was totally blown away by that. And I immediately said, you got to sign me up for this. I don't even know what it means, but I'm going to do it. So what she meant was that psychology of the deep sort, anyway, is now directing itself toward, and it sounds like there's a convergence here possibly, creating new kinds of culture, deep kinds of culture, visionary and imaginal, I should say, kinds of culture. Do you think the Entheonet has a potential for that too, that it's, in its emphasis on community and shared visions, that we're talking about actually a new kind of culture on this planet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it really does kind of break down some barriers, and I think that's one of the important things in learning to have this kind of a deep culture is breaking down the barriers. And just kind of as a side thing that I didn't get a chance to elaborate on, there are some really interesting and fun things that you can do to actually break the barrier, and I call this community therapy. And it's basically just going out in the community and treating the community as a playground where you kind of mess with people, not in a malicious kind of way, you know, but it's like you in Subway, you say, hey, can you give my sandwich a name? Or, you know, just like interesting things like that. And it's really cool when you do that, and because the recipient is like, they have that look, you know, they're just like, because people are not used to that. We're just so cut off, even though we're right next to each other. It's a really interesting phenomenon when you break that barrier, and people really open up. And connecting with people is, I think I'm sure we've all had experiences where you just connect with that complete stranger or something, and it's just like, it really does a lot for you. So I think the Entheonet is kind of this sort of feminizing force in that it breaks the barriers down, and it like creates a kind of a wholeness, and it connects people. And hopefully through that connection, people can come together and talk. Yeah.
As you were talking, I was reminded of something that George Carlin said. That he liked to go to the grocery store and start picking things out of other people's baskets. And they'd go, no, that belongs to me. And he'd go, no, it doesn't. It still belongs to all of us. And that would kind of... So if we looked at some of this, the Entheonet in particular, through the lens of myth for a second, and I'm thinking of an archetype as well. There's a cross-cultural image of the web, or the net, that comes up over and over in mythology. The net of Indra, with all the jewels in it that reflect the universe, and also consciousness. And I'm thinking also of Sir Isaac Newton, who a lot of people don't know that he was a tremendous alchemist. He spent 25 years doing alchemical research secretly in his apartment at Cambridge. Something that could have gotten him into a great deal of trouble at the time, by the way. And he was, at one point he was striving, and we have his notes that the Royal Society is now published on the internet. They look at this as sort of this quirky thing that the genius guy did in his spare time. Newton didn't see it that way at all. He saw it for big pieces of his life as his primary work, actually. And so in his writings he talks about how he's trying to build the net. And there's an actual alchemical operation. It's a chemical operation too, that you put together certain substances, and it forms a purple net, inside of the alchemical container. So here's Newton, who, as one of his biographers put it, he wasn't just the first of the modern scientists, he was also the last of the magicians, trying to create the net, intuitively seeing in advance, you know. So this image of the net, and of course the World Wide Web and all that, do you think that's an example of one of those archetypes you mentioned that returns to life in the present, perhaps to get an update?
Yeah, actually I think it's a modern kind of alchemical process, because you know, the ancient alchemists, they were projecting their psyches onto the matter as kind of the idea, and then with something like an Entheonet, you're projecting the images because you're in fact searching for the images, so you're actually creating the picture that you're searching for. And although sometimes it shows up as kind of an archetypal representation that kind of closely matches what you're looking for. So I think there's, it's really uncanny and very interesting when you actually, if you can find a way to really remember in detail what those images are, which isn't too difficult with entheogens, but dreams are a great example. If you can really focus yourself in remembering your dreams, it's kind of difficult at first, but once you get in tune to the process, you actually start having more vivid dreams, I think, when you but you know what, dream journaling is really great, by the way, and that is kind of almost like an Entheonet type of experience. And when you dream journal for a while, and I would say it's, you know, usually by dream number 20 or so, you start to see a pattern, and you realize there's this, there's something you quite can't explain, because it's dreams are rather like a breath of nature, but they're different characters, or actually they're the same characters, but they have different masks, or they're in different plays and things like that. So the archetypes always show up. They're trying to force their way out. And I think especially so in this modern day and age, it seems like there's more of a reaching out, if you will, of these archetypal themes. And I think it's because, you know, ever since the consciousness split from the unconscious or collective unconscious, it's been seeking integration ever since, and it just seems like now in this day and age it really needs integration more than ever.
I'm glad to see ERIE so involved in that part of this, all of this journeying to the integration piece that's so important. A while back, when I was trying to come up with my own sort of playful big picture way of holding all these different things that you've been talking about and that we've been witnessing in the world, from the renewal, it's never gone away of course, but the renewal of interest in entheogens, and also the renewal of alchemy and ecological awareness and trans-species psychology, as they're now calling it. All these different things happening. I got a small grant to do a little bit of poking around in this library in Santa Barbara, and one of the things I came across was an interview with Joseph Campbell, and he mentioned that photograph that was sent back to Earth on Christmas, the day before Christmas, 1968, and the photo's name now is Earthrise, of course. And I was struck by a couple of things. One was that the response of the astronauts who took it was primarily aesthetic and embodied, rather than just intellectual. They were astonished at the beauty of the Earth rising over the edge of the moon, and so they started snapping color pictures. So I found that interesting, but even beyond that was Campbell's comment about this. He said maybe, and he said this in an interview with Bill Moyers also, maybe this Earthrise is the image of the new myth for our time. So I'm wondering what you think about that in the light of everything that we've been talking about. It seems like also implicit in this image of Earthrise is seeing Earth as a whole. So the rise of Gaia consciousness and the image of the web and the Entheonet and all the other things seem like they unfolded in some way.
Yeah, they tie together nicely, because it's like the Entheonet, or even just the internet, is helping to kind of expand this kind of global consciousness. I mean, an event, something happens in China, it's like we're aware of it in a couple minutes, you know? So there's this, things are echoed almost immediately across the globe. So I think it's really, just like the Earthrise thing, is this idea of, you know, seeing the Earth from a distance and not seeing the boundaries. And so that's kind of what it's about, is dissolving the boundaries. And but I really like the idea of, because I know Joseph Campbell talks about that as the emerging new myth, or that's the only one that he could think that would be a valid myth for the modern day and age. Although I think he said that things are happening, you know, much too quickly for mythology to crystallize. But yeah, I think it's definitely a valid, like, mythological happening, because and there's something deeper than just the, you know, the image of the Earth. There is a global, not only a global awareness, but you know, I think possibly and there's some talk about this, but you know, the wired orientation of the Earth is kind of like a nervous system. So it's almost like an alchemical sublimation of the Earth itself through our technology. And Terence McKenna had this interesting notion that we're the genitals of our machines, and because we only exist to improve next year's model.
Yeah. So one other point, and I was thinking pretty soon we should open this up for comments from all of you and questions as well. So as part of this reconnection with the planet itself, there's some speculation that some of us have been doing who love Jung's work, but we're also critical of certain aspects of it. And when we've gone back over the old alchemical images and manuscripts, we can see the part that Jung talks about where we project qualities of our consciousness into matter as alchemists, looking into the retort, cooking things, mixing up substances and all that. But we're beginning to wonder if the process is actually more of a conversation between us and our materials, as though there's something about matter that's projecting itself into us. And what you were mentioning about how when you use entheogens, very often it's as though the plants or the place itself or something else about the Earth speaks directly to you as an animated being. So for me, this raises the possibility that we can actually be partners in the sentience of nature as well as we do this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that comes to mind is the guy that I mentioned earlier, Stuart Green, and ecobiotics, and a lot of his stuff has to do with what he calls the harmonic mind. And actually he has a dual mind model where there's the narrative mind and there's the harmonic mind. And the harmonic mind basically is just life itself is kind of this quantum computer, and connected by these little quantum bits. And so every little quantum bit that moves is felt by the one next to it, and so on down the line. And so I think that you know, consciousness and intentions and things like that are sort of acausally weaved into matter and into nature itself. And of course there's the double slit experiment, which really opened up that whole idea of the collapse of chaos, or whatever it's called, collapse of the wave function. Yeah, did that? Okay.
Yeah. So at this point, should we take a few questions, and especially to you since you're the presenter? I'll take a few if you have them for me, but feel free. Does anybody have something? Yes, sir.
As far as the Entheonet is concerned, I wanted to ask you, do you think it needs to be built, or do you think that it might already exist, and all we need to do is see the difference between it and our egos in order to know that?
Choice B, definitely. But I think that, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it does need some kind of fine tuning, and it's always going to be a process of growth. It's always going to evolve into something maybe even beyond what we can conceive of, but I think a little bit of both.
I wonder, something I'm curious about, and maybe you can talk about different aspects or whether or not they're both included in the Entheonet, but I'm kind of curious about the difference between dreams and the symbols in dreams and the archetypes in dreams, and visions and the symbols and visions and archetypes and visions. And if you think they're similar, or if they're in different sort of areas of the same galaxy, if you will, or what have you, and maybe you could sort of differentiate the two.
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and that's something that I asked myself for a long time. It's like, so what are the, because I'd spent so long dream journaling and seeing these visions and then experiencing them on ayahuasca, but it is different. Ayahuasca itself has a particular kind of flavor to it. When you drink it, it's very bitter. Not that kind of flavor, but it has a kind of a, it's horrible. Just horrible. But it has this kind of feminine component to it, and I wonder sometimes if that's if we're projecting that because we are aware of kind of the elements of where ayahuasca is from, perhaps. But there really does seem to be this kind of this space of like the woman in the forest and jaguars and the hall of the mountain king, and so it tends to be kind of specific. And also what you're dealing with is, especially in a group session, is the weaving in of everyone else's experience, And I've had a few kind of little personal experiments that I did where I would, they have like 3 or 4 sessions that you do in one night, 3 or 4 doses. And so I would skip a few and find myself full blast tripping again, It's like I was, I could feel the resonance of the experiences of other people. Now, there's also, if any of you are familiar with Stanislav Grof, he does some great work on, back in the day, he wrote a book on LSD psychotherapy. And then he's got this thing called the BPM. It's the basic perinatal matrix, and it's really uncanny, the similarities in my visions and learning about him afterwards, about the process that we go through, which is where there's this kind of this first initial stage of absolute horror and blood and guts and viscera and all this stuff. And so he likens that to the trauma of birth, but then you go through stages, it gets better. So there's always a very specific kind of sequence that takes place. Sometimes not, but for the most part there is a sequence. And there's also patterns, certain patterns that you don't see in dreams. There's color schemes that are different from dreams as well. There's a few images. In fact, there is like this very specific kind of sequence of actual images of, someone called it a retinal circus. I think it was Timothy Leary, and it's very specific. So yeah, I think there's there's some similarities there because you're tapping into the other realm. You're tapping into the unconscious and the collective unconscious, but they're just kind of different eclipses or something. I don't know. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a bit about, in your experience either of you, how we can integrate the visions that we have on Entheogens and our dreams to create this world, this earth community that we want to foster around the world. Because as you mentioned, the visions are extremely hard to put to words. And so how do we take that, bring that down into context, to this reality, and bring forth a new earth?
I think it's by transformation, and this is a lesson that I learned after a couple years, right? And so I started out actually as this, as a scholar, and it's trying to kind of delineate the mysteries, and and you go through this process of like this kind of visionary exploration. We were just really tuned into the visions and exploring them. But later, what happened to me is I was transformed by it. And so, really, what it is a difference between transcendence and transformation. And there's another component aside from, you know, the visual circus and the imagery and all that, and that is listening to this kind of deep, unspoken message. And for me, there's always that message or that voice in my sessions that says, go out to the community, get in touch with Uncle Larry. You haven't talked to him in 5 years. You know, so there's all these things that seem to be oriented towards community building. So I think just paying attention to that and learning how to transform whatever it is you learn into your life somehow. And it's really great if you can do it in a context where there's a kind of a structured group setting, and that's what I found myself in. And that really helped because you talk to people. There's people who are guides who've been doing it for a long time who can give you guidance on learning how to transform these things into more kind of a sustainable living and a happier life and things like that. And actually, most of the people that go there are very community-oriented people and are all beginning to work on ways to connect with their community.
I have a question in terms of alchemy and individuation. Because I understand the concept of alchemy, but it hasn't really sunk in as to why is it important. Is it important because it shows that we're projecting our psyche onto matter and that matter is projecting back? So if you could speak on why alchemy and in terms of how it relates to individuation.
Sure. Or maybe me and then you.
Yeah.
How about that? So, huge question, so I'll try to give the elevator speech version of what my response would be. And I'll take a really specific example from alchemy. A lot of the alchemists said that to get the materials that you need to create the Philosopher's Stone, which is their symbol for, they had hundreds of names for this substance. It would grant long life, it would heal all ailments, it would turn base metals into gold and ordinary glass into gems. So it was a very high principle of growth and what Jung would call individuation. But they always said that, and many alchemists have different ways of looking at almost everything. They seldom agree on anything, but this is an area that most of them do. They said that you're not going to find the beginning of the work in temples anywhere or on the tops of mountains, that you find it in the dirt, in the muck. So when I think about that metaphorically, so in other words, when I make the move of translating that into psychology, I have two reactions to it right off the bat. One is that when you ask yourself, where are things edgy for me right now? Where is the messiness in my life? Where is the work that I need to do on myself? And above all, what is that part of myself that I'd most like to get rid of? You know, maybe my symptomatic self or my angry self or whatever it is. The alchemist would say, if they could speak psychological language, don't get rid of that, because that's where the gold is. So that seems to me important in the psychological sense. In other words, you start the whole process of individuation with where you feel uncomfortable. So that's one part. The eco-psychologist in me loves the dirt. I mean, if you put your hands in the soil for 20 minutes, there are soil bacteria that start elevating your mood. There's Prozac in the soil, right? Only it's better. You know, so start in the ground. Permaculturalists and organic growers will always tell you, tend the soil, and the plants will take care of themselves, more or less. So there's an image right there. You know, everything that's going to be tall in my life is going to grow out of the low places of the soil. In other words, reconnect with the earth, and my individuation will proceed in a good way. So that's one example. That in many ways, the path of alchemy through all these different procedures is the path of the psycho-spiritual journey through all these different internal procedures until you never fully arrive. And many alchemists actually said, you know, once you have the Philosopher's Stone, that's great, because then you can go back to the beginning and do it all over again. And you can take the whole stone through the process and refine it even more. So it's an endless journey, and so is individuation in many ways. So anyway, that's my elevator speech version of it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. Alchemy, from my understanding, and what it means for me is about finding the stone and what the stone is, or it's called the lapis philosophorum. It goes by many names, and really what it is, and what I've learned from not only mythology but from my own experiences, is that it's the self, and it always seems to lead back to the self. In mythology, there's the idea of the labyrinth, and the labyrinth is the unconscious realm, where the journey kind of begins. And it's an interesting journey because the labyrinth is open to a lot of different influences. But the thing is that the thread of Ariadne, who's I forget all the names and who she was the daughter of, but she's was in the labyrinth, and she made a thread so people could find their way out of the labyrinth. But the alchemy really is about finding your center. And just to give you a kind of a short version of what the center means, we experience it now and then. Athletes experience it when they're in the zone or in the flow. There's a center, and on a deeper psychological level, there is a true, deep, intelligent, profound self, and that's what individuation is all about. But in terms of projecting onto matter, or like projecting onto the matter as the alchemist, I think really it's more of kind of a co-creation where when you have these synchronistic events and you see symbols appear suddenly and things like that, meaning is being created at that moment, and you're attributing meaning, and the meaning is being brought forth. So life is kind of works that way. Everything is kind of weaved in that way. So I think that's what alchemy really is all about. It's just navigating through the labyrinth, and then finding the self. And it may not never truly end, but I think you definitely make it to points in your life where you're individuated, and you've reached a very high plateau in your life, and maybe you want to keep going. And you should, because that's what life should be about, is like living the mystery and learning to treat life as kind of an adventure. Yeah.
One other, just a quick comment that came to mind while you were mentioning that. As part of what you just said, for me, alchemy, the delight of it is that it gives us a series of images that can guide us when we get confused about how to move forward. And alchemy often has very bizarre imagery. And that makes perfect sense to me, because often the way forward doesn't match up with our linear, rational way of understanding things. So, as one example, a lot of us tend to think of in terms of inclusiveness, and let's bring it all together and let's integrate it. But there's an alchemical operation called separatio, which means either to divide up the prime matter so that you can refine different parts of it, or to even cut part of it off because it doesn't belong in the alchemical mix anymore. And when I read that, I remember it gave me permission to get rid of something in my life that I was trying to include and integrate and make peace with, and I was fighting my own bodily realization that this just doesn't belong to me anymore. So alchemy is full of this wonderful imagery like that can help with moving things through. So.
On line with what you're saying, you just reminded me of there was a guy, Olomowski, that was teaching here about 15 years ago. He called it a higher order simplicity. And that makes sense because it can't keep getting complex forever because it breaks apart.
Yes.
So the higher order simplicity is what kind of forms in the alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
I was just reflecting during your lecture about this Entheonet, this concept, this idea. And what kind of struck me is the Entheo, right? It's like we're going within God, right? And when you look at, in the past, the shaman, which would be the figure that would go into these realms, took information from these realms, various realms, information from the spirits, brought it back to the world for the betterment of what was going on in the village. And then we see mysticism, where a lot of that is, it's like a psychonautic exploration in a different way, where the person transforms themselves and their view of the world shifts. So the Buddha became something different because his view of reality shifted. So it seems like the Entheonet, if it has any sort of meaning for me, it's like when we go to the internet, we're plugging into these symbols that people have put out electronically. And they're kind of these icons, and these things are out there, information, and we're taking that in. And I'm saying, what would be an Entheonet? What is this modern, different thing that it's not just mysticism, it's not just shamanism. So it would be something that, as you're pointing toward this thing that actually shifts, it's about this transformation you're talking about, where it would be alchemy, the mud from, turning mud into the lotus, so to speak. I think of, with the school, Sri Aurobindo, he put a huge cartography of consciousness, but it wasn't just to state that it was a cartography of consciousness. It was to say that this is, how do we create the life divine? How do we create a change in this world? Knowing what having these explorations, using these various tools. And it's not just, it's the entheogens. Now there's technology with binaural beats and stuff that put people into certain states. We're starting to explore this, and so it's becoming more of a wider mass exploration of that. And it's like, what can we, not only, how do we shift the consciousness and bring information in so that these worlds start to become permeable to us, and it actually creates this world that we want to see. One of the things that you had mentioned, the Santo Daime Church, I think I was fascinated by them because they are onto something that's really important. They do group meditations with the medicine. The dance works, where they're configured in a particular configuration, and people are dancing together. There's an energetic field that's created by the collaboration. So it's not just an internal journey. You're actually reflecting outside and inside at the same time, and creating a vision, a group vision that you would not have otherwise. And that's really different. I thought, I was like, wow, this is pointing towards some of this, what we're craving for. It's not just, oh, I had this vision, or I had this dream, or I saw this mystical vision, or there's this guru, or no, it's more like we're all tapping into, in a participatory way, participatory vision, this world, the schizoid worlds, and bringing that in to inform what we do. So that veil is right there. Right. We come in, we're getting information, we're shifting our perceptions, and to me that's an interesting concept. You talk about entheonet, because I'm really stressing that kind of sense that largesse. It's transformation and transcendence and immanence, all of it.
My experience with the Santo Daime Church is, actually, I'm glad you bring that up, because that kind of helped me to think about this whole idea of Entheonet. And you're absolutely right that they have this structured kind of environment where they're absolutely in harmony with the energies that are present, and it's so deep, and it's much more in depth than I've experienced with any kind of shamanic context in using ayahuasca. They really have something great there. And that's really where I learned to kind of transform things, because here you are dealing with, they call them works, right? Because you're truly working on it. And you're dealing with your own personal issues, but at the same time you're like singing in Portuguese, and you're dancing, and then you're staying in sync with this group. They call it I think it's the Cohenchi, the current, but it's great because you find yourself in a tough spot, and it's like you tune into that current.
You tap into the current. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing, and to experience and to know. It's like we might have moments where we link with someone like that, but to know that through this vehicle you can connect in this deep way with this current at will. It isn't, so that's more like an entheonet. It's not a haphazard thing. It's not a synchronicity that we happen to notice. It's actually something that we can go into space collectively. Yeah, that's cool.
Are they local?
They're in Portland.
They have it in Ashland, Oregon also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like 3 churches in Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None here?
None here.
Oregon has them all, right?
Los Angeles.
Oh, Los Angeles.
Oh,
You say Santa Cruz?
Or but they may not be legal in Los Angeles.
Oh yeah.
They
Maybe in Oregon.
I know in Oregon
They
they are.
passed a law, so it's
Oh yeah, that legal thing.
religious freedom and stuff. I think that's the only state so far.
That's the only one, I think.
Is there more states that Santa Dame is one legal cases in, or just Oregon?
Just Oregon, from what I understand, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about Terence McKenna's ideas about 2012 and the kind of crescents of novelty and
Yeah, he's got some interesting notions, and so he used the what is it called?
Time wave zero?
the I Ching.
And I Ching, yes.
Time wave zero.
I think things are kind of speeding up on some levels, but I don't think there's this general kind of true speeding up of time space. I think what's happening is it's kind of there's this like illusion of speed, because we're in this age now where there's not a vertical orientation. There's this horizontal kind of orientation where we have an accumulation of complexes and cultural templates and all this stuff, right? And so there's all this stuff that we're navigating through, and occasionally we tap into the center of our lives, and it's like, oh wow, So it's kind of like when you go on a road trip and you're going somewhere for the first time, and it's like it takes a long time to get there because there's all this novelty and cool stuff, and then on your way back, it doesn't seem like it took as long. And I think that's kind of what's happening now with us, is like we're there's this illusion of speed, because we're just there's so much stuff that we're navigating through psychically. He's got some interesting ideas, though. I don't think anything's going to happen right, like December 21st. Although I think I'm going to throw a party, though, just for that.
Have an Entheo party.
When you were talking about self and the world, from yourself to the out and from the out to you, in the ancient Greece, at that time the world was running around you. Now, 2,500 years later, we know that we're running around the world.
Yeah.
I keep thinking of that Earthrise image, and how we look at we now have the psychological experience, the majority of us, instead of just visionaries, of seeing the Earth as a whole. In one of those interviews I mentioned, Joseph Campbell makes a comment about how for hundreds of years, I should say, the dualism of seeing matter and Earth as down here somewhere, and spirit is up there somewhere. And he makes this kind of throwaway comment about it. He says, but when you see the image of Earthrise, you realize that the Earth is in the heavens. So for him, it has the potential of announcing the breakdown of all these old unhelpful dualisms in some ways, and changing our perspective of where we are on our own planet.
Yeah, actually, I think we are kind of running circles. Joseph Campbell said something about how man should not be in the service of society. Society should be in the service of man. So, and this kind of moves toward this idea of having a deep culture where we're intimately connected, and we don't in this society we don't have ethos. We have lawyers. That holds everything together, you know. So in a way, it's like we're kind of locked out. So in a sense, that's a pretty good, incisive observation.
I just kind of wanted to plug into the concept of the ENTHEONet, and some tools that I can perceive as having relevance into this concept is we're all collectively creating this global awareness and this global consciousness, and having the discussion of what is an entheogenic experience, and then utilizing these different tools, may it be phenylethylamine, tryptamine, whatever have you, to kind of carve out different experiences. And then, when you get into smaller circles and you have people who have explored these medicines over and over again, and these conversations come up, you really start carving out with crystal clarity some of the different benefits, or some of the visions, or some of how to work with the medicine. And so, one thing that I can perceive as important is not just the images, but also the whole full spectrum of the physiology and the subjective experience. And then people can look at this and they can say, oh yeah, well I can see how this can be relevant, or I can see how that can work. And eventually we're going to be starting to chisel out what is going to be the individual experience from the collective consciousness. And as we really put that information out there, that information comes inward, and it can become more of a information feedback, so that people can use these as tools, and where it's kind of like a information roadmap for where people can go with these things, and then how can they progress past what has already been found.
Yeah, there does especially seem to be this kind of this ideological constraint, right? And so there's this kind of pivotal point. And this is what, in mythology, it's called the alchemical wedding, the opus. And it's the marriage of the mother and the father. It's the marriage of spirit and matter. And so it's interesting to kind of speculate on what the next step is. And machine visions kind of like hint at this idea of of the singularity. And I didn't even touch on the singularity because that was just like throwing a wrench into everything, because it's some interesting stuff, this notion of having microscopic robotic organisms where we're the host, and just completely redefining what it is to be human. And has anyone ever seen Existence, the movie? So there's this director, David Cronenberg, who does a great job of portraying this notion of like spirit and matter. And he's got like this, in the movie, these characters have these guns made out of bones and like flesh and things like this. So it's a really interesting kind of thing to think about what's on the other side, especially with technology, because technology seems to be ahead of us in a way, like it's waiting to catch up or something. Remember, the 70s Star Trek where they had like all the big bleepy buttons and stuff? It was clearly like part of the 70s pastel design. So I'm wondering, like now, if the design that we have in sci-fi movies, if that is actually going to, is there going to be something beyond that even? So yeah, it's cool that you bring that up, because it's just another thing to like think about, and the entheogenic exploration really kind of helps you to. It's not necessarily something that could help us thrive as these community-oriented cultures, but it's just it really helps to kind of oil those wheels and get our minds thinking and start conversation about things. Yeah.
I liked what you were talking about earlier when you spoke about at the particle quantum level, that the particles sort of, you didn't say feel each other, but you said they are aware of each other in some respect, you'd think, and that consciousness and physicality may be wrapped up in some kind of helix or duality or whatever. And I've been thinking the same thing, and I was just curious if you have anything else to say about that.
Well, do you know about the dual slit experiment?
Can't remember.
So, and this is a while back. I'm not sure exactly when it was. Maybe it was the 70s. So basically, they took a photon or something of this nature, and they shot it through a slit. And on the other side of that was a wall. And so they, measured a vertical line, and then they put two slits. And then they would send one particle beam, and it would actually, it would behave as if it were a wave. So the beam would split, and then recombine on the other end, and then it would actually form multiple lines on the wall. So they're like, well, matter has a wave function to it. And so then what they did is like, well, let's observe this. And so they set up a camera, and sure enough, there was just a single line and not the multiple lines. So as soon as consciousness, or at least an extension of consciousness, intervened, there was a collapse of that wave function. So the consciousness intervened somehow. It was kind of weaved into that process. And that got, physicists thinking. And now we're really seeing interesting things happening in all the disciplines. You're seeing psychologists interested in physics. You're seeing physicists interested in psychology. And so you're seeing this multidisciplinary approach as a result of these interesting phenomena.
Time for one more question.
So I think that a lot of people have been disenchanted with religion, and in a sense, that disenchantment also took down the need to worship, or didn't provide a space for people to worship and connect with that need to worship. So it sounds like what you're saying with living the mystery, going back to the source, in a way is trying to figure out, okay, well, we lost the middleman of religion to connect us with the mystery, so now we have to recreate that ourselves. So in a sense, we have to recreate our connection to God, or source, or creator. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it should be directly with God, and the middleman is the clergy, and so that's where it gets into trouble. Is you have these middlemen who are filtering the experience and saying, well, everything's going to come through me. I'll absolve your sins. You give me some money, and we'll work out a deal here. And so it's totally messed up, really. So there. Modern religion doesn't meet the needs of people, because religion is really focused on the literal translation of the meanings from the Bible and the images and things like that. It's not caught up on the symbolism, on what it really means. And one good example is that I think I mentioned earlier, Christ transcending into heaven, and really he was transcending into himself and wanted everyone to come along with him. So it'd be interesting to see where religion goes, actually. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us tonight. And by the way, I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It's a fiction book. It's called The Night of Darkwood, The Last Tree Whisperer, and semi autobiographical. There's some interesting life experiences that I've had that reflect what I was talking about earlier, how life should be your playground. Some really juicy stories in that book, and also some of it was based on my visions, and I turned it into fiction. So it's only $10. It's a good read.
One left.
One left?
One
Okay.
left.
One left to go faster.
Well, thank you everyone for being here and for supporting this work. And thank you very much, Craig and Justin, for sharing your time with us and for nourishing us with these fascinating topics. It's an ongoing dialogue. Just to let you guys know, we have